Welcome to Decode, Colorado. I'm Tom Mustin for PBS 12. Water, seemingly all around us, but also in increasingly short supply. In the next hour, we'll explore the issue of water in Colorado, where it comes from, where it goes, how it's used, and who gets to use it. PBS 12 commissioned Colorado documentary filmmakers Domínguez and Raúl Paz-Pastrana to capture the experience of living and working in the San Luis Valley and how water, or the lack of it, is impacting their lives, their livelihood, and the future of the region.
It was like an organic theme to just talk about water in the valley, which is a macrocosmos of what happens everywhere else and what is happening. And I think there you can see the two forces, the main industry and trying to, make it an industry for agriculture and cattle and other animals. And then people that want to do it the old way, which is natural to the land, and how they are finding that balance. And I think the valley was a natural place for that.
I think what's changing is there's a couple of things. I think the way that agriculture handles their irrigation system through sprinklers, that's a different innovation. It's been around for a while, but it just has different climate implications. And I think it took a while for that to be seen. And so I think now that they're really trying to find the balance between different types of irrigation for different types of crops. And also, there's another innovation to me is also just like looking at the kinds of crops that are going to survive at not only in a place where there's water scarcity, but also very high altitude. Right. So that really dictates what kinds of crops are actually what kinds of crops are able to be produced in abundance. I think we're talking about it now because climate change it's a wider effect and people are paying attention to it more. And there's in the valley there's a real sense of a connectedness to things that have been done for decades and centuries. And so I think it's looking back to the past to how we can best plan for the future in terms of water, which is like the basis of all life.
Right now, I think a lot of people have been talking about it before. It's been more amplified now, and some people are just beginning to talk about it now that didn't talk about it then. And I think it's the old saying, this problem has been happening for a while. Some people talked then, some people didn't. And the best time was to talk then, but the second best time is to talk now.
I think it should resonate with all of us because mostly in the sense that water is also it's specific to a place in a lot of ways. So I think the water that's flowing behind us, the folks that are the closest to it are going to want to use it first. And it's to me, thinking about water as a commodity that can be bought and sold, to me is a very foreign concept. I can't quite get my head around that. And it's almost like saying that the water that is scarce in the valley is somehow put to better use in another county. To me, that's just a very incongruous feeling to me. I think what we didn't realize was how connected caring for water is to tradition. The acequia systems have been in place for hundreds of years, and really thousands of years if we go back to indigenous traditions. So I think that was just the resilience of a method that is tried and true, that is repeated, and it does work.
Water is drying in that area, and everybody below is going to dry as well. So they're starting to think in ways on how to use the water that's more beneficial to them and to the future. I think that trend, at least in the people we interview, is happening. And I think that hopefully will spread even to the other county that you mentioned earlier, because, if the water goes, it goes for everybody,
I think there's a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of hope just realizing that as modernity moves forward, that it's always helpful to be rooted in something that was here before us and that worked before us.
We're all in this together. This is just a small place in Colorado, very important, but it's compared to what's happening in the world, in this country and around the world. And if we don't come together as a community, locally and worldwide, we're not going to be able to tackle global warming and the scarcity of water. I want people to take that when we come together, when we build bridges instead of walls, we can have a more hopeful future.
Following the documentary, PBS 12 has assembled a panel of Colorado water experts for a roundtable discussion. We'll examine the issues facing our state and what we can do about it. There's a lot to cover, so let's begin to Decode Colorado.
I think we think forward to the Navajo origin story and how the water giver, of course, teaches us of the importance of water to life, a sacred source of life. So we're looking at one of the sacred mountains of the Diné, Cisnajini, black belted mountain. She gives birth to the two heroes of the Navajo creation story, the water giver and the monster slayer. I think today we face a similar situation where our world needs to reconsider the sacredness of water and understand that we're here to protect water so that it can sustain life. And these are peas. This was the first row. These are the San Luis peas. And, once we weed it, you'll be able to see where they are.
I'm sixth generation, 1850s, I don't know exactly the date, but somewhere in there they came in with their sheep and came up into this area. And I grew up on the farm, helped my dad, and I went off to New York, went to college, and then oddly decided I liked it here. So I came home and I've been farming with my dad. I've done other things as well, but kind of trying to take over and step into that situation on our family farm.
When your dad was here, did they grow other things besides alfalfa?
Oh, Los Alces used to grow beans, corn. There's still bean machines out there where they used to combine the beans, yeah, and sell beans from Los Alces. Field peas, sweet peas.
As we had water year round. Anyway, it's all getting less and less. Harder and harder to farm a ranch.
We sometimes undervalue ancient techniques, and we're always rushing to adapt to modernity. The acequias have been around longer than any other form of irrigation, and I think in the 7 villages here in the Culebra watershed, people are very committed to the acequia way of life. In northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, acequia farmers are among the longest lived protectors of the nation's agricultural biodiversity. By growing corn like this high elevation, short season variety called Encinal Azul, they're high elevation, resistant to drought. They can tolerate extreme UV radiation. You have to keep in mind that the intensity, I think, of UVB radiation increases by about 11% for every 1,000 feet gained in elevation. So we're like 80% more intense UV radiation here than sea level. So if we're going to face the challenges of climate chaos, we really do need to learn to value this agrobiodiversity knowledge that acequia farmers and traditional indigenous farmers have been keeping for thousands of years. Our corn needs to continue adapting to climate chaos because there's a lot of changes going on in the upper Rio Grande watershed, not the least of which is reduced snowpack, like significantly reduced snowpack. Our snowpack has seen a 30 to 80% reduction in depth. As if that was bad enough, the moisture content of the snow is less than it used to be. It's like you're getting powder, ski powder snow in May and June, and that's not normal. So climate chaos has made it very difficult for us to predict from one year to the next what kind of irrigation season we're going to have. But the long-term trend is the reduction of the depth of snowpack and a reduction in the moisture content of that snow.
They, like my family, had sheep, and they just herded their sheep up into the, especially up into the high country. It was a very like traditional way of living was have your sheep down in the valley during the winter and feed them and keep them warm, and then move them up into the high country in the summer. And that was kind of like the traditional way that people were herding their sheep and moving them around. Very different climate then, actually. Like it was a lot wetter, and my great-grandfather used to say that the grass was so tall out on the prairie that it would brush the bellies of the horses, which now you think about that, right? And you look out there and you think, wow, I can't imagine a time when there was that much water. I mean, I think in ag right now, there's this push for like, get big or get out. And I don't want to get big and I don't want to get out. So I've tried to be really creative and like, how do I stay as a small producer? So basically, I figured out that if I can make every animal count for more, then that helps my bottom line. And it also helps the environment because, right, I don't have to like overgraze, I don't have to push my numbers. You know, I can have like a smaller bunch and still make money off of it. I do a variety of value-added products. I do raw wool, actually. This sells for people who are fiber artists and they want to do their own processing. And then I also do, this is kind of like the next step along in the process. This has been cleaned and carded. This is the natural color off the sheep. And then yarn, of course, which is ready to be knitted or crocheted or woven. And these are all my natural colors that I breed. I breed my sheep to have, you know, this natural color variation. Climate change, even though we're talking about it as a future thing, it has already happened and has been happening. We are getting warmer, and we have been since like the 1950s, and so it's interesting how we're talking about like climate change like it's in the future. But I think what we're seeing in the Southwest is climate change has already been in progress, and then you have long-term drought. Traditionally, they were mostly doing flood irrigation, open ditches, lots of trees. You know, there wasn't really, actually the focus on like clearing brush and flattening land, that actually happened a lot later because a lot of the Hispano communities kind of worked with whatever was, you know, what they had there. And they used the natural topography to bring water to places.
Yeah, Roy. Have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
less
Oh, yeah.
water over the years?
Oh yeah, sure. It's diminished a long ways. Even my dad, when I asked him when he was about died on me, when he was 90 years old, 91, I asked my dad what change did he see here in the valley. He said less water, and he's right. The less water has been coming on us for a long time.
Yeah.
Not just
Not
now.
just 20 years. When my dad's family came here in, 1900, the late 1890s, it was paradise. I mean, there was water everywhere. In fact, when they started farming the valley, they started making drain ditches to take the excess water away from the farm ground.
That's true. That's very true.
People couldn't even get out on their farm ground to farm because the sub was so...
Too much water.
But that's what you call liquid gold out here on the Taos Plateau. And there's my floats, the white one and the red one. Now that it's cloudy, we're not getting solar to operate the solar pump. So what we do now, we supplement the solar power by overriding it with a generator. So when I start that, the solar pump down here in the anthill well will start pumping water into the cisterns. And when they get to a certain level, they pump the water 3.5 miles west, and they actually go up 700 feet in elevation, where I have 2 storage tanks and a couple of tire drinkers. And from those drinkers, that's where the cows have to have water. You have to have water. You can't run out. If you run out, they'll spread out and die.
So you guys don't own the land, you own the right or the allotment.
On the
to
BLM, you
use the
just
land.
have a right to use the grazing on it. All this grazing permits were made by the Homestead Act, and it gave people a right to homestead out here. I had my grandmother homesteaded out here in 1902. We talk about climate change, and we're deeply affected by it in the Southwest. You don't normally get 2 or 3 inches of rain in June. So sometimes it's early, sometimes it's late. And right now, this is like paradise. I was telling my grandson, we were up there watching the cows. We moved him into a new water hole. And the sage and the winter fat was 6, 7, 8 inches tall. We were eating our sandwiches there. I go, I've been to Waikiki, and to me, this is prettier than Waikiki. Watching our cows eat this fabulous pasture, because it doesn't happen every year. It's so random. You get a enormous amount of water, snow, rain, or you don't get any. That's the biggest fear in a farmer's or rancher's life, is the weather. It can knock you out of the business. I'm 72, and I can almost count them on one hand, the good years. And on the other hand, a lot of bad years. 02 was so bad out here, so dry, and you get dry years more than you do good years.
She'll scramble to get on. See if she'll jump. See if Lisa will jump.
I'm going to go look for the beef. I'm missing 8 cows and 8 calves. I got to go see if I find them. Off I go.
So, a couple years ago, it was really interesting. It caught my attention. It was a community event centered around the idea of resilience and mental health. And then they also offered free well testing for heavy metals. And then I had just put in the well here, and I wanted to get the water sampled. And Dad went, and we ended up sampling this well here. and it turned out that it was high in arsenic, which is like a known issue with some of the wells out here.
Yes.
Yeah, and so they wanted to include this well in a multi-year study for monitoring heavy metals in relationship to our, groundwater and precipitation, our water cycle, and so they aim to monitor 1,000 wells across the valley for like a multi-year study and have sampling across the years. And they wanted to see if with the drawdown of water there was an increase in heavy metal concentration, thinking that heavy metals were released when there's less water. So like they're here all the time, the metals are, that's just part of the geology of the land. But that like human interference and our use of the aquifer was causing them to be released, like something in the chemistry of the soil.
Wow.
So they're still gathering data for that now, but they're thinking that there is a relationship, some sort of correlation, which is a huge public safety concern. And so cows drink this water, we drink this water. I don't know of anyone who filters their water.
You have a situation, as you can see here toward our watershed, the Culebra branch of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. That snow is our water. I can tell you a story. That snowfield that you see on the left side is known as El Águila, or the Pajarito. And depending on the timing of when it appears, you know what kind of irrigation season you're going to have. If it shows up too early, people are going to fight over water. But if the snowfield shows up late June, early July, we're going to have a good year. And this year it was early June, a little early, but better than last year when it showed up in May and we knew we were going to be miserable. And indeed, we had very little water last year. There's a lot of pride about acequias and the incredible knowledge it takes to be a good flood irrigator. It's an art, but with very smart adaptation of modern technology, like these irrigation pipes that I'm using. By using these irrigation pipes, I can control erosion, I can control the rate at which the water is flowing a lot easier, and still get the benefits of flood irrigation with the minerals that are suspended in my well water. It's an openness to modernity, but without abandoning ancient norms of governance and the wisdom, the ecological wisdom of flood irrigation when appropriate. So I think we're becoming more of a hybrid system. Some of the acequias now, instead of being earthenworks, are either lining them or they are sending the water in pipes to the next user. If I approached a neighbor and said, will you grow an acre out of your 50 acres? Instead of all 50 acres of alfalfa, make it 49 acres of alfalfa and 1 acre of food crops for the market. And I've actually gotten very little resistance. People are, yeah, you're right, Peña. My grandfather used to do that. But guess what? Last year, we had 10 farmers signed up. Only 3 of us had water. That's climate chaos.
More land into production, so more water has to go out to production. So with the sprinklers, they they were able to do that.
Do you guys think that there needs to be innovation in flood irrigation? Like, does the method need to change? Or are people like needing to?
I would say
what
yes.
changes do you think? So if you want mass and crop and a lot of biomass and bales, you want to do sprinkler over flood?
Oh yeah, it does a lot better. But the only thing with sprinkler, it doesn't recharge the water out down on the aquifer like flood.
So then how do you?
That's the only problem.
How do you manage the decision? Like invest
Yeah,
in
both.
a sprinkler, so it's more efficient, but the use
More
of water is
efficient,
more.
yeah.
You
But
use
the water that was back then, back in the, it come all the way down to the rivers over here. Now they don't. That water don't make it to the river anymore.
So do you think there's still going to be like generational farming and ranching?
Oh,
Yeah,
big farms
on a
maybe.
smaller extent. But here in the
Water.
valley, we're sort of unique. But down here, Cornelius County, it's family operated.
Yes.
I'm trying to work with this understanding that things are maybe not going to get better. They might, but probably not. And so if we can have perennial pastures with grazing animals on them, grazing animals can really rebuild soil in ways that we can't do with crops. And also having those perennials and those living roots in the soil just offer like a level of drought buffering. Because we've had years like where we lost crops and we couldn't water them. And so I think that's kind of like what I want to focus on is like, how do you create systems that building soil moisture, but how do you work with this really not really great soil and try to build up maybe some sort of resilience to drought, and especially with like organic matter and water retention. I tie in like modern ideas with old traditions. But old timers, there was a reason they did sheep, and there was a reason they did they were pastoral. And I think a lot of it was because they were trying to live in this dry area, and they knew that if you focus on crop production, you're not always going to be able to weather those storms. And so I kind of tie into those ideas of like, why were the old timers using sheep? Well, it's because they do great at high altitude. They're the only animal that still gains weight in the winter. Their wool gets longer if it's cold, so you get better growth if you have a cold winter.
If we're going to have climate chaos adaptations, one good place to start would be the acequias. But because we are a model for trying to adapt, so we're growing our drought-resistant crops. We planted drought-resistant lentils this year, for example, that we've never grown here before because of demand by the local community. I think we're a model. We become a template, and not just in terms of the agrobiodiversity, the types of seeds that we grow, but the governance structure that we represent, the one irrigator, one vote principle, the principle of shared scarcity, that in times of drought and everyone uses less so everyone can have some, including more than human beings. That's how acequias have always been managed.
I have a lot of concerns because, we're seeing water speculation. Even though we are in the situation we are in, we are still seeing speculators come into our communities and they want to buy up water to take to the cities so that people can have their lawns. And I think that that's not going to go away, and it's probably just going to get worse because Colorado is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and there's just so much pressure on a limited resource.
In the end, water's not a commodity. It's a cultural, ecological, and spiritual resource to be shared by all people in some sort of equitable manner, including sharing it with more than human beings.
So incredibly powerful stories and a lot of issues to explore. I'm joined today by Jim Lockhead, former CEO of Denver Water and currently serving on the board of directors for the Water Foundation. Sarah Klahn, water law attorney and member of the Water Trust Board of Directors, and Tom Romero, law professor at the University of Denver and faculty director for the Interdisciplinary Research Institute for the Study of Inequality. That's a long title. Very impressive. And great to have you all with us. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. So we just saw this documentary. How big an issue is this? And let's start with you, Jim.
Well, the documentary is a great storytelling on a number of issues that we're facing in the West in water. With the advent of climate change, with competition for water among cities and rural areas, among states, among the West Slope, the East Slope, the show just kind of in a little microcosm of the San Luis Valley hits on a lot of those different things.
And Sarah, you're a water law attorney, so your title alone tells us this is an issue, correct?
Yes, it is. It is an issue, and that's kind of what I do. We try and resolve these problems within a framework of something we call the prior appropriation system. And the acequia is kind of they kind of stand apart from that because of the different tradition from which their property interests arose.
Okay. And Tom, so you're a DU and in the legal part. What kind of legal issues do you see here when you hear about the water stuff that's going on?
I mean, in many ways, when we think about water, it's probably the most important property right in the state and the foundation of property. We don't live here. We don't have development. We don't have the ability to drink water. We don't have the ability to farm and ranch without having a right to water. So I would say it's probably, if we're thinking about one of the most important legal issues or the foundational legal issue in the state, it all revolves around water.
Well, and it looks like, it's a kind of a finite asset. We were in the documentary, they were talking about how Douglas County was trying to take some of the water from San Luis Valley. I mean, does that happen a lot? Do you all see that where other cities or towns try to get water from somewhere else? I'm sure you saw a lot of that there.
Well, having worked at Denver Water is famous or infamous on the Western Slope for diverting water from the West Slope over to the Denver metropolitan area starting in the 1930s. So really a tremendous amount of foresight that went into that kind of development. Development historically in those times was more of a linear thing. If you needed more water, you just went farther afield to find it. Today's reality is that those types of importation, giant water projects just can't get done anymore. And so it's more about conserving efficiency, recycling, reuse, as opposed to just building new big projects.
And so you're saying they can't do that anymore. Is that because they don't have the resources to do those kind of projects? Or?
The resources are there, but the politics, the permitting process, Denver Water has been working on the expansion of Gross Reservoir, for example, and has been over 20 years, nearly 25 years in the permitting and litigation process to try and get something built.
And you're keeping people like Sarah in business, right? Sarah, are there a lot of lawsuits in the state now from different jurisdictions trying to take water?
I wouldn't say so. No, I think Jim pretty much summarized the challenges that our people are facing, and that there is a real acknowledgement that there isn't enough water on the West Slope to bring to the Front Range without a tremendous amount of legal and permitting kinds of efforts. I mean, these are all things Jim mentioned, but I think people are looking for alternative ways to get water for municipalities. That doesn't mean if you're living in the San Luis Valley and Douglas County comes knocking that you don't worry.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
And Douglas County's got a lot of money and they don't.
And it doesn't mean that you wouldn't have to spend a lot of money as a municipality or a county or whatever to try and combat that. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's very practical.
So I'll ask you and Tom this then. Is there something that legally that our lawmakers can do to help out this problem?
Well, I mean, I'll start.
Tom's sharpening his pencil.
I mean, years ago, the legislature adopted a statute that requires, if there is a transfer of water from one basin to another, that there be monetary compensation and other kinds of compensation for the original basin where the water came from. So that could take the form of having to pay an in lieu kind of tax or something like that. So that because once you lose that water, you might lose some of your tax base, especially if you're drying up agriculture. Jim may know, to the best of my knowledge, that has either not been used or rarely been used. Do you have any experience with that?
No, I don't. It's mostly the local land use permitting process and what's called the 1041 land use process. It gives local jurisdictions tremendous authority over a project that would export water out of a basin.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the issue in the San Luis Valley is exacerbated by the climate change issues that came up in the video as well. So that the reality is, as you know, I can sit here in Denver and say this isn't going to happen, but it probably doesn't feel like that if you're on the ground in the San Luis Valley.
And, you know, there are people that are saying that meteorologists I know do not believe in climate change, but the facts are there. Remember, they were talking about how in 1890, the horses had the weeds were brushing up against their bellies because the grass was so high, and now it's done. So the climate change, is that something you were dealing with too when you were Denver Water?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Less snowpack. So the water supply for the Denver metropolitan area for Denver Water is reliant on snowpack. There's less snowpack. The runoff is about 2 weeks earlier in the spring than it was even 10 years ago. So we're seeing changes in runoff patterns. We're seeing drier forests, which increases the wildfire threat. We're seeing more severe flooding events, for example, and more severe drought events. So the extremes in weather patterns are more and more. And those are just, as you mentioned, proven facts.
Right.
And
they were saying the moisture content in the little snow they do have is way less than it used to be. It's powdery, that kind of thing. So let me. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one thing that might be useful for your audience to think about in such simplistic terms is every snowdrop's really owned by someone, right? So it could be Denver Water or every snowflake, right? Every raindrop. And so this, as we get into the climate change issue, right? As we start getting these earlier springs, this greater runoff, as we start getting less water, it means that those that already have water rights are not going to be able to get their water rights satisfied. So we're thinking now about the scope of the problem. Right. And if we're just looking at the scope of the problem from Colorado, that's where everybody's looking to figure out how and in what ways we can get water and we can move it to other places.
That's the million-dollar question. But so along the same lines, we've touched on this a little bit too. What kind of policy changes would all of you like to see in a perfect world if you could wave a magic wand and say, hey, let's institute this now to help our water situation? What do you think?
Well, as you see, as we talked about with climate change and decreasing water supply and increased competition for water, the contrast between the acequia system that was highlighted in that film and the doctrine of prior appropriation that Sarah mentioned, where it's literally first in time, first in right, water is allocated. If I'm senior to you and I'm not getting my water, I get my water first and you might not get any. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing, and that system is built on the past. It's built on an assumption that the future is going to look like the past, that there's going to be as much water in the future as there was in the past. And so that just means more competition. It might be interesting to kind of learn from that acequia theory of democracy and sharing, particularly as we talk about the interstate disputes that we're seeing on the Colorado River Basin, which if those were allocated by priority, cities like Los Angeles, Phoenix, Las Vegas, even Denver would be cut off from their water supplies from the Colorado River.
Yeah, exactly. So what's your take on that, Sarah? What would you do if you could?
I mean, I guess my initial thought is we're lucky in Colorado, and I'm going to separate this from the interstate issues that Jim just mentioned. In Colorado, I think we have a long history of district court decision-making about allocation of water. We have a robust administration system. We have, so we have dedicated water courts. Mm-hmm. There are things that already exist which could be used, tools that can be used by something like an acequia to try and protect their way of life and their uses. And I mean, I've been fortunate to be involved in a few cases in my career where we kind of used the prior appropriation system in a way that wasn't traditional. And I do feel like there's some flexibility, some give. So I don't know that I have an ask for the legislature or anything. I would also add that I think Douglas County has a problem. I mean, they've built an entire metropolitan ecosystem on a water supply that for the most part, they have some renewable water, but for the most part, they are relying on groundwater that's going to disappear. So, maybe that brings us back to Jim's point about trying to find a way to cooperate. And Denver Water has been, in fact, a leader in trying to help the South Metro area with, here, I'll just do your little shtick for you.
Appreciate that.
Gosh.
Trying to help the South Metro area.
Money's being exchanged. We're saved up. No.
With renewable supplies. So, there are, but I do believe that there are some, there are solutions under this current system. And I don't know that I have anything I can point to that would be like a new thing the legislature would do.
Yeah. What about you, Tom? If you could wave a magic wand,
Sure.
what would you do?
I think one of the things, and I'm in particular thinking about the acequias and kind of the special role that they have. It's a system, as we learned, right, that goes back, to Moorish Spain. And it is very much tied to community and cultural values. And I think as we've been thinking about and talking about, our system of water law in the state is both old, but it's also flexible and adaptable. And we've seen things like being able to create things like in-stream flows to protect
the
habitats.
sprinklers they're using now.
Yeah, the sprinklers. So I think, one particular thing particularly tied to this documentary is how can we protect the water and keep water in stream in the state for things like acequias, things like the cultural values of indigenous peoples. And so that might be something that certainly to explore in the legislature.
Sure. So let's get out our crystal balls and look 30 years down the road here. What do you see when it comes to water, not only in the San Luis Valley, but also in Colorado? What do you think, Jim?
It's got to rely on partnerships, on collaboration as opposed to competition. We need to have agreements and arrangements between, for example, the West Slope and the East Slope, between Southern Colorado and Northern Colorado, between rural and urban, that will keep agriculture in production, that will preserve rural economies, that will allow cities to grow more efficiently and densely as opposed to sprawling and taking up agricultural land. And that's going to require a lot of collaboration. So for me, if there's one thing that the legislature could do, it would be to deal with the issue of inefficient sprawl growth that is eating up farmland. And if it continues, doesn't really portray a sustainable future for Colorado.
That's a great question. And Sarah, you mentioned Douglas County. What do you see in 2055 in Dougco? A dry county?
I don't think there'll be a dry county. I think at the end of the day, there will be, and there already are, alliances being built to try and provide water. What I don't know is if it will be affordable to continue to build, because I'm expecting that some of those alliances may involve the exchange of money. It's not just going to be people being nice and saying, here, take our water. Mm-hmm. So you're going to end up with a more expensive financial situation for home builders. And at the end of the day, we have to figure out how to do this. We all know this isn't the topic, but we all know there's a crisis in housing. We've got to figure out how to build the housing quickly enough to make it available to people. Right. But that also relies on having to have a water supply to make that go.
Yeah, it's true. What's your take on that, Tom?
So one of the things I always tell my students is we're going to reach a tipping point. And the question becomes what is going to accelerate us to that tipping point? I think if you look at our history of water law, if you look at the ways that the water law has developed, we've always been able to engineer ourselves out of issues, right?
Sure.
And kind of kick the can down the road, right? And I think just what Sarah highlighted, we're going to reach a point with the cost of housing. I think climate change, it is such a unknown variable of how that's going to accelerate the lack of water, right, that we're going to have available. So I always try to remain hopeful that we're not going to reach that tipping point where we will have to make some tough decisions, and we'll have to be thinking about what the population can handle. There'll be, I think there will be a lot of pain at some point, but I think that's a very real possibility.
One of the things that really struck me when I was watching this documentary, they mentioned there's arsenic in the water there. And I wish I could talk to some water experts about that. Wait, I have three right here. Well, how big an issue is that? Arsenic in the water does not sound like something that's a good thing.
Well, it's a natural occurrence.
Right.
Obviously, the point of the documentary was that the persistence of arsenic has been exacerbated by overpumping of the aquifer, which means a higher concentration of arsenic. So it's an illustration of that the overuse of water supply, whether it's groundwater, surface water, has all kinds of spin-off implications in different areas, whether it's water quality or other areas.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Sarah?
I would agree. I mean, I think that, and from a kind of a technological perspective, the removal of arsenic is incredibly expensive. And so it's not exactly something that you could like slap on your faucet and feel comfortable all the time that it's taking care of it. And that raises a lot of challenges for rural areas that are seeing these kinds of things.
Yeah, because the water is scarce enough, but then the water you have there is not safe. So what's your take on that, Tom?
Yeah, I think there's two issues. It's fascinating when you say you have a bunch of water law experts here, because for the most part, we've created this distinction in our law between what we call the quantity side and kind of the water rights side and the water quality side. And so one of the challenges we have is how do we get those who have water rights in conversation with those that are using that water for drinking water. And a water utility like Denver Water is able to obviously, bring those two pieces together. So the second challenge I see is how do we do that? And I think most importantly, conceptually, I think it would be important to think about human right to water in this state, because as we've seen in other states, and what it does is it creates a financial mechanism to create an infrastructure, particularly for rural communities that do not have the tax base, right, to really invest in cleaning their water supplies.
Right. I mean, this documentary to me was really eye-opening. What was going through your mind after you finished watching this, Jim? Anything strike you that you didn't know, or just kind of reaffirm what you were thinking?
Well, it was interesting in that it was the storytelling of these families and small family farms in the San Luis Valley, but in a way touched on a whole list of different issues that we're facing in the West in terms of water supply. And so it did a really nice job of just kind of raising those issues in the context of people on the ground, living day to day, trying to make a go of it with small family farms and agriculture.
Right. And Sarah, my feeling was I was watching thinking, God, we've got our head in the sand here in Denver. These guys are dealing with this situation right now. What struck you when you watched this?
I think it was that the resilience of the folks that are still making a go of it under the acequia system, and keeping trying to keep the corporate farms out and trying to maintain their way of life. I found it in many ways it made me feel really good. And, that we should be doing things to encourage the maintenance of this community.
No, the filmmakers said that too. They said their takeaway after doing this was how resilient that people were, and you can see that. What did you think, Tom?
A couple of things which is exciting. I think that idea of just the long culture, right? And if you've been down to the San Luis Valley, and if you walk those acequias, or if you go to the other part of the valley where there's not acequias, but there's historical ditch rights, and you walk those ditches, and what you see, right, is a whole community and generations that have really been reliant and resilient on this place, but they've also, in their preservation and in the care that they have with the place, they've also created these wonderful watersheds, riparian watersheds, and really vibrant communities that continue to drive the area. So
they did a great job of presenting what the problem is, but they didn't really have a solution. What is the solution, or is there one?
I'll go back to collaboration, and I'll use as an example the Colorado River Basin. There are negotiations going on as we speak between the 7 states that share the Colorado River, including Colorado, to try and agree on guidelines that need to be adopted by the end of 2026 for operation of Lakes Powell and Meade. And they've literally been stuck for 2 years on positional statements and priority and competition around what I would characterize as a zero-sum game, which is I win, you lose, because we only have a fixed asset. And somehow we collectively need to move from that and figure out a way to run the system again. It's similar to an acequia, where it's reliant on hydrology, but also responsive to hydrology. And the water is shared in more of a community approach that keeps kind of everything going in the bad times, and that way everybody can flourish in the good times.
And Sarah, it seems like almost the time for talk is sort of over. We need to have some action now.
I think we need leadership. I mean, there's some opportunities here for politicians or even just local, people, some of the folks that are on the acequias, to step up and try and begin the kinds of discussions that Jim is talking about to try and move that ball forward.
Any final words from our favorite PIO here?
Yeah, I think what I would say is I think there's things that particularly aspiring law students or aspiring water law attorneys could begin to do. There's a lot of work working with the acequias and just helping to firm up their water rights, update their bylaws, making sure that legacy of community control and kind of that democracy that exists, right, is hardwired into the system. And I think that's true not just with the acequias, but many of these historic ditches around the state.
Well, we really appreciate you all joining us, and thank you for your expertise. It's a situation that definitely needs a lot more talking. We'll probably have you on again, but thanks again, and let's see if we can work out some kind of solution here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Decode Colorado. We hope you've come away with a better understanding of this complex issue. To watch any part of this presentation again, visit pbs12.org. Find us on the PBS Passport app or on our YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm Tom Mustin for PBS 12.